Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the W podcast. Another episode. It's going to be a little bit of a strange an episode because SaucyJay is not here, as you can see. He was supposed to be here, but there is a power outage at his place. So we are hoping that he's going to surprise us and join in a few moments. But even if he doesn't, the episode is still going to be a special because we have a special guest. I'm joined by JustDiscipline, who obviously plays Discipline Priest. So welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, delighted to have you. And we are obviously going to talk a lot about Discipline Priest, but the conversation is actually going to lean to a lot of other different topics. But
hmm
before we start, let me just throw it back to you. How would you introduce Discipline, or not Discipline, but just Discipline to somebody who doesn't know you?
So I've played Warcraft since vanilla. I did take a couple of expansions off. I was doing some other things IRL, but came back with COVID, as many of us did, and switched over to Discipline. My main specs up until that point were everything else. And I really just felt like I found my niche. And over the course of the last couple of expansions, I fell into coaching for gamers. It's a site called Medify. Check me out over there. But it's been a really fun experience for my journey to go from being a player to an educator. And just personally, that's something I think Warcraft needs more of, and that's kind of been my motive. So yeah,
So how would you say, are you like a player now? Are you a coach? Are you both? Something in between?
I definitely do both. I think at the start of the expansion, it was more evenly split, but as the expansion has gotten a couple of months in now, it's kind of trickled off, and I think that's just due to the player base. But I am currently in running for title, so that's Mythic Plus title for top 0.1%. So I have a team, and I play very competitively with those guys, and I coach on the side.
All right, so you're definitely a player if you're competing for a title. But do
Doing
you
my
do you
best.
puck keys or you only play with your team?
It's a little of both.
Okay.
So I'm playing in the bracket above 15s, and it's just a nightmare to try and get into pugs. These keys can be so difficult without coordination. It's almost not worth your time. So I do pug some, but I try and find some free time until my group is together.
Yeah, and also I don't think there's that many keys in that range where people were pugging, so that's another layer of difficulty to overcome if you want to pug there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There are some, but not too many. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you then. Obviously, you've been playing a lot this season. If you're pushing for title, how was season one for you so far? Did you enjoy it? And then how would you compare it, for example, to everything that happened in Dragonflight? Is it better or worse?
Well, so I've mained discipline throughout the expansions, regardless of where it falls in the meta. I just happen to be in a seat of favor now that it is the meta. So I've tried to take advantage of this opportunity and push for the title for once. But in the past, I'm the type player where I judge it based on how much fun I have. Personally, I don't give too much attention to what's meta. So in the past expansions, like even Shadowlands, it wasn't that popular. I still loved it. I do it for, I guess, just my own passions. And discipline is something I enjoy. So it's the spec that I play regardless of the meta. But yeah.
Okay. And in comparison to Dragonflight, is it better? And I'm not just asking about discipline, but like the whole experience of Mythic Plus. Is it better or worse, in your opinion?
I guess from my point of view, I'm liking it. I have a better opportunity now. Just I guess luck of the draw. But a lot of people in the community, it's a hot topic item that a lot of people aren't happy seeing how forced we are to play the meta. The numbers are dropping off for the player base. So I think there's a lot of things we could cover here, but I personally am liking it. It feels quite a bit like Shadowlands, which was one of my favorite expansions. So yeah, I'm loving it so far.
And do you think that part of this could be because you're playing with a team compared to pugging, or is just the gameplay in general?
I think it's a mixture. Having a team makes a big difference when you can coordinate your spells between one another. But then also, just our spec at the moment feeling a lot like Boon of the Ascended is a really fun gameplay, in my opinion, and it feels a lot like it used to. So I'm loving Discipline. Yeah, I think it's pretty fun right now.
Okay, and is that true even if you're pugging?
Um, I think there's things you can do even if you're in a pug environment. A lot of my career in WoW has been in a pug environment, and something I'll always stand by is a strong UI. So I think as long as you're seeing what you need to see, there are ways you can coordinate with your team even without being in Discord or even without knowing each other. So I think it's possible, but definitely the way the game is structured right now, things are becoming harder.
Yeah. Oh, I'm asking because our sentiment kind of is that discipline is probably one of the hardest healers to bug keys into for many
Mm,
different reasons. Just the way that the healing works. So you do a lot of AoE healing, but if you need a spot healing, then maybe you're in trouble. And that happens a lot in bugs with people just face soaking mechanics that they shouldn't be. And then
yeah.
even more so, you are unfortunately a class that doesn't have interrupt. You're the only, I would not only healer, you're the only spec in the game apart from Holy Priest that doesn't have interrupt, right? This season specifically, there were a lot of pain points with a lot of poison dispels that the priest also doesn't have, a lot of curse
Hmm.
dispels.
Hmm.
I personally play this. I enjoy it a lot, but when it comes to pugging, I'm a little bit sitting at the edge of my chair and I'm like, oh God, what if, and I don't have the
Yeah.
solution.
Well, I think I always hearken to UI. I think it's a very important part of playing Discipline. There are so many things we have to see. I think to your point, you were saying it's not super pug friendly, but I think with the right UI, even spot healing is something we can do pretty well with. With our shields. And then your point on fears, I think there are ways we can use our toolkit to maximize interrupts. And so I would say Psychic Scream is our best bet. It's not as good as someone else's, but it is better than it used to be. So I think as long as you're coming to Discipline with like an open mind and looking for ways to improve, there are a lot of utility spells in our book to really help even a pug environment.
Okay, so you're saying that you can always find the solutions no matter what, as long as you want to master the spec and play it at your full potential.
Um, I think every spec has its place in Mythic Plus. I wish more people saw it that way. But we do have a lot of really nice spells in our toolkit. And as long as you, I guess, maybe take the steps to try and, maximize those spells, I think there's a lot of potential for Discipline, even not having an interrupt or even being poor with spot healing. I think there are ways around it for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, this is in a good place because it is kind of like the
Hmm.
meta healer this season. Correct me if
Yep.
I'm wrong, but it was meta at the end of Dragonflight as well. It performed really well in those seasons. Um,
I, I
s-
think
yeah, go ahead.
I think it, I think it was towards the top of the list. I'm not sure if it beat out Shaman. I honestly don't remember, but I think maybe Disc and Shaman were top. But I
Mhm.
think Shaman was beating us out.
Do you mean for season one in the War Within?
You said Dragonflight.
Yeah, Dragonflight. Yeah, okay. So yeah, at the end of Dragonflight, there were actually a lot of people who played. It was just not that one healer. You had some options. You could play Shaman. I think you can also go
Right.
with Mistweaver in some of the highest keys.
Hmm. Hmm.
This season though, it's even more straightforward because I don't know how many people are playing something other than this for the highest keys out there. So it's
Yeah.
it's definitely meta.
Yeah. I was looking at that chart before we started the call, and yeah, pretty much all the healers right now, if you're in a competitive range, it's discipline or go home, kinda.
Yeah. So how does that feel to you? Playing, being so you played, obviously you played for disc for a lot of time, and
Mhm.
now all of a sudden you're meta for multiple seasons. How does that make you feel?
I do like it. I've put a lot of work into my gameplay, a lot of work into my spec, and to finally, after a couple years, be in a position where I can make a run for title because discipline is quote unquote meta. I'm doing everything I can to take advantage of it, and I've also kind of, leaned more into being a coach. So I'm trying to help those who are interested to learn. Personally, I wish things were more balanced so people could play what they like, not what they feel like they have to play. But that is, yeah, that's a whole nother problem.
Yeah. And would you push for title if disc was not meta?
For sure. Yeah, the previous expansions, um, yeah, I've always tried, but at the time, I personally wasn't as experienced with discipline, nor was it in meta. So I never got there. So this is my first time in the run for it. And I think maybe with having played it now for 5 years and becoming really comfortable with it, it's something I can, kind of go for.
Okay, and how did it feel back in the day when it was definitely not meta? Because I think there were a lot of periods when it was maybe even at the bottom of the chart of the healers. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, did you still enjoy it? Did you still play it?
I still loved it. And I'll say it again. I'm the type WoW player that I play what I like because that's what I think is fun. I am a very competitive type person, but Warcraft for me is something where I just want to log in and have fun. So I'm going to play what I kind of vibe with the most. And I've played all the other healers. This one definitely stands out for me. And yeah,
Yeah, I wish more people were like that. Just focusing on the fun factor a bit more. Uh, and I'll say
yeah,
this: I started playing Disc somewhere in Dragonflight more seriously.
mhm,
And I was kind of scared in the beginning because it's a healer that works completely differently to everything else that's out there.
mhm,
And then I realized, okay, I don't have interrupt, and then I don't have poison dispel, and all of that is scary.
mhm,
But then I started pressing my buttons, and at some point I realized that I really enjoyed it for the reason that if I'm playing a different healer, I carry some kind of additional responsibility, because I have the interrupt, I have the dispels, etc. And as
mhm,
disc,
mhm,
I'm pressing my buttons. Like I'm not the best disc out there. I'm just pressing my buttons. I'm doing all I can to heal the people. If they live, they live. If they don't, they don't.
mhm,
But there's so much less that I can do. Like it's up to them to interrupt. Because you said okay, you can fear, but fear doesn't work on every mob, etc. Right? So it's
mhm,
kind of like the responsibility that you have moves towards the rest of the group, and I'm just sitting there enjoying myself, pressing my buttons, and I don't have that many cares for
mhm,
comparison to some of the other healers. Um,
mhm.
so yeah, and that somehow makes it fun for me. Maybe doesn't make it fun for other people. But how
Well,
do you relate to that? Again, I'm not the
yeah.
best person to play this, but this is how I feel when I play it.
Well, to your point about the poison dispels, I don't think anyone is happy about that. I I don't know why Blizzard would make a set of dungeons that pretty much only had poisons. I don't know their intention behind that when it comes to the lore or whatever their decision making process is. But I think the best way to get around that is have a dungeon spread that shares dispels. So they're not just dispel and curses. I'm sorry, poison and curses like they are right
Yeah.
now. I don't like being helpless in a sense and having to rely on others. And that is kind of one of the positions discipline is in right now is we just have to have a shamans, we have to have paladins, and it's to kind of complement our spell book. But yeah, with fear, like at least when I'm with my students, the way I approach it is every poll has a best place we can fear, and that's something I've loaded into my UI. So it isn't as good. It doesn't work on everything, but it definitely does have a place. And I think being that that's one of our weaknesses, the more we can bring a well-timed fear to a group, the better.
Okay. And then let me ask the question in such a way. What do you tell your students if you are in a situation where you're pugging and you end up in Arakara and there's no poison dispels and you're in this cringe situation where you have to deal with the poisons? What is the advice
To
there?
to be fully transparent and honest, I would just say don't get in that group. Like something I tell everyone I teach in WoW is you have to have your appropriate dispels in party, and you kind of just have to know which dungeons require which dispels. So if you get in an Arakara and there's zero poison dispels in group, it honestly just needs to be reformed, and that's kind of the state of WoW right now.
Yeah, and this is what annoys me a lot because basically you're introduced to a problem in the dungeon and you don't have
Hmm.
the solution. And
Yeah.
people say, and like you're saying, okay, let's reform. But I think that Blizzard just needs to do a better job designing these things because, especially with me, because I don't have a team, I pick all of my keys.
Hmm.
Once you get to a certain level, let's say like 12, 13s, 14s, then there's just that many less keys at that level. So there's less pucks
Hmm.
in general. And you
Hmm.
don't have the luxury to like reform the group. You spend 10, 15, sometimes 20 to 30 minutes waiting in LFG just to find people.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
talking about shaman or something that can dispel poison. You're just looking for people, man, because they're not there.
Yeah.
And then you get your group, you go into the dungeon, and you're faced with this problem that doesn't have a solution. And the
Yeah.
solution
Yeah.
was like 20 minutes ago when, you were forming groups. So you're kind of screwed at this point. Um,
Yeah. I do wish it was more evenly divided between what are they? Disease, poison, curse, magic?
yeah.
Yeah, I wish they were more evenly, split up in our keys, but at the moment they're not, and yeah, just that what I would do is if I was in a group like that, I wouldn't do it. At least with our Kara in particular, those poisons are so damaging.
Yeah.
You have to have I mean, I would say you have to have at least 2 in party, 1's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, especially on hierarchies. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess do you have like a different solution? Looking forward, of course, the season is basically over. But
Mhm.
instead of reforming the group, do you have some cooks or some cool ideas that Blizzard can implement? Because I think they do this from the perspective, oh, we want every class to be unique, every class to be different, and everybody brings something to the dungeon. Which is fair,
Mhm.
but if you don't have that thing that needs to be brought to the dungeon, then your key's basically bricked.
Yeah. Well, it could be wishful thinking, but something I've heard around the community is an idea for a healer to be able to dispel anything. So, like for priests, we're only magic and disease. If all healers could dispel anything, I think that might be a pretty easy solution, or at least a step in the right direction for a season like this.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I don't know if they're gonna do that because that kind of
Right.
loses the uniqueness of the dispels.
Yeah.
Um,
Wishful thinking for
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, but I would also love to see that, especially from Pugging perspective.
Hmm.
All
Hmm.
right. And then talking about this, looking forward into season two, what changes would you like to see? Like, what do you expect from the game? How could it become a little bit better from the perspective of disc and then from general perspective, all the healers and even the tanks?
Well, I think discipline is in a good spot. I think they've gotten a lot of love recently, which has been something we've all kind of wanted for a while. So, I mean, my biggest wish going into the new season is more one for the community. And I hope that the developers can make a more balanced game so that people could be encouraged to play something they like. I think when you're playing something you like, that has to lead to retention and some changes in dungeons where one death doesn't equal the key failure.
Yeah.
I think that would also lead to more success. I think more success, feeling like you're learning, those also have to be key point indicators for retention. So I think if they just make a more balanced game where people can play what they like, it also might be wishful thinking. I wish more people like myself would teach WoW. I think that would also be great for the community.
Oh, we're gonna get to teaching later, but teaching
Yeah.
is not easy. Going back to what you said though, can you like explain what it means balance to you? How can they achieve that? Do you just mean class balance, so you can play whatever class you want, or you have a different take on this?
Yeah, class balance, spec balance. I forget which season it was, but we've only had one of those in the last 5 years where it felt pretty balanced. And I think what I mean is pretty black and white, just the numbers. So if you look at a set of 10,000 runs, we have the meta right now, which is Prot Paladin, Disc Priest, Death Knight, Evoker, Shaman, and it is meta because their numbers stand out by a mile.
Yeah.
And there has to be a way to fix that. I don't know if I know the solution, but between the specs, if there was more balance, I just
Yeah.
think that'd be so much better.
And do you think a more frequent tuning and pushing class into a certain and specs into a certain direction is going to help?
Potentially more frequent tuning. I also don't know anything about how they develop these games, but if they were able to test these numbers before something goes live, we could maybe dodge these problems altogether. I'm really not sure why they're happening. Part of me wonders if they're doing it on purpose, but yeah, having specs that are so far beyond the rest, I think that's a major game problem. I think the differences between specs should be, minuscule at best. I don't think they should be like this. it's not fair to those who, just love playing arcane mage or something,
Yeah, I agree to that. I think they have good intentions in the beginning when they release stuff. Probably their goal is to have everybody lads on the same level, you know.
Hmm.
But I think they missed the mark because obviously they try to test and there's PTR and things like that. But it's
Hmm.
one thing if I go and test, let's say, Discipline Priest on the PTR, which I did.
Hmm.
We're gonna
Hmm.
talk about this as well. And then it's a different thing if they give the same character and you play with it, right? So it's just that I think once you do the tuning, once you get the numbers out, they might look good, but then once you give them into the hands of a very good player, he can actually outperform by a mile everybody else. And
Yeah.
maybe they don't have a way to test in those extremes. And this is how the meta, comes to life. People start playing, they figure out, oh, I can do so much damage with this, and then everybody starts to play it. Although they probably cannot output the same numbers with you or some of the best players. And then I don't know what would be the solution, but maybe you start tuning for those higher end players, which would probably screw up the other
Yeah.
layers of players. But it's a complicated problem.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point to bring up too. It's a very small percentage of the population that plays these high level keys. So they kind of have to, I assume, consider the majority, which is not in the 0.1%. So I'm not really sure how that plays a factor. But I mean, I would think they're probably watching these type numbers and metrics every day. I mean, why they can't make changes every 2 weeks or something to make things more balanced? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, that kind of goes a little bit to augmentation evoker since it's been introduced. And I would like to hear your opinion on augmentation evoker as well. But the point there is you're buffing other people. And if you give that class to somebody who is mediocre, they're going to
Hmm.
do horribly, right? They're not going to perform well. You're probably going to break your key, etc. But then
Hmm.
you give that same class to somebody who can really min max it and they can do wonders. And
Hmm.
then not
Hmm.
only that, but they're buffing two other people who can also do wonders because they're the best players.
Yep.
So you end up in this world where the standard deviation, I'm using some math terms, but like the difference between the best performing players and the mediocre players is such a wide range that if you try to nerf the best players, you're gonna make this feel even more miserable for the mediocre players. And if you just buff it a little bit for the mediocre players, then that's gonna be exponentially huge buff to the best players.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So what's your opinion on augmentation of Ochre in that regard, being part of the meta now for so long and probably staying like that for season two?
For sure. I guess I have mixed feelings. Like you were saying, the best AUG is going to make a difference when you have the best group. It's really dependent on how well the group is. And then, kind of conversely to that, if your AUG isn't hitting their uptime on their certain spells, you're really going to feel like you have a ball and chain in the party. But from the perspective of a healer, I love having an assist, like someone acting as like kind of my assistant, keeping the group topped. Things like Zephyr, we're noticing more and more in these higher keys, having a group wide defensive means a lot for a key. So I personally love having them around, but they do rely on a strong group. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is why we say that they're horrible into pugging, especially in lower keys.
Hmm.
It's a different
Hmm.
topic. All right, last question on this regard on this topic. How are tanks feeling for you this season after all the nerfs and now we have to heal them a little bit? They need a little bit of help, things like that. Um, how does that feel for you? Did you enjoy the changes? Do you have problems healing them, or it's irrelevant to you?
Well, I know things have been changed and you can definitely see it. You can definitely feel it. But I also kind of take the stance of just because it's different and harder, it's still not impossible. So there are ways to still do it. And it's pushed me to kind of improve my UI and make sure I coordinate with my tank more. And I like that. I like the difficulty. I like the challenge. But we're in this position, when we're running a 17. If you have one global missed, it can cause a death. And I don't necessarily think that's too much of a problem, but in 17s, one death means the key is over. And I think that's too big of a consequence. So personally, I kind of like the challenge. It's pushed me to build a stronger UI, but I think having one miss global and a tank dying and losing a key, I kind of think that's too big of a consequence. So I'm not sure a solution to that, but yeah.
Oh, here's my take on this. If you're running extremely high keys, and I don't know if 17s are there because I'm not at that level yet, but I know people are timing 20s, they're trying
Yeah.
21s, right? So
Mhm.
if you're pushing world first keys, I think what you're saying, it kind of makes sense. Like if you make one mistake plus 21, you're dead. Okay.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
can take
Mhm.
this, but what you just said, you miss one global, people start dying, you wipe your key. I think this becomes true much lower in the chain. Like this is true for 12s, this is true for 13s. Because obviously you're not playing with the best players there, so your DPS
Mhm.
is a little bit lower, and the timer is something to pay attention to. So
Yeah.
even in like a plus 13, if a big AoE happens, and it doesn't have to be disc priest. I've talked about this before, but in this keys, every healer to me starts to feel like disc because in disc when the damage is coming, you have to prepare, right? And
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
when the damage comes, you press one button, everybody's healed. But if you're late and you're not prepared, and you miss one global, basically everybody dies. And it kind of
Yeah.
it starts to feel like that for every healer because the damage checks and the healer checks are so huge that missing one global, somebody dies, you wipe. And I
Yeah.
think it's way too early for that to be true for like 12s and 13s. But correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it's a very different system that we have today that we've had in the past, and I think a part of it is just the shock of going to something so different. I do think potentially it's all been overtuned, it's been made a little bit too hard, but in the same breath, that was something the community asked for. So it's like, now they've given us what we've asked for, and now we're complaining that it's too hard. And I've talked about it with my group and my friends. I don't know a solution to this, but they kind of started to approach this subject in keys that are sub 12. They made that change where your key doesn't deplete below a 12. Well, what about us that are in 17s?
Yeah.
We would like a bone thrown our way because ours is harder. And something I would love to see is also wishful thinking is just having like one do-over per week per tune. And I think this would promote learning, this would promote repetition. For example, if we know we have a do-over, we might run the key all the way through just for the practice. And that is something that I've always kind of just been that type of person where I just practice, practice, practice. I think that's how you find success, repetitions, muscle memory. And, when we don't have a chance to do something again, we're completely losing that chance to better ourselves. And I have to think, like I was saying before, that will lead to retention. That will lead to people feeling successful. That will people lead to people feeling like they're getting somewhere. And it's just having one global mist, meaning the key is over, I just think is a little too punishing.
Yeah, and then you have to spend so much time farming the same key again so you can try again. It's
Yep.
way too punishing. Yeah,
Mhm.
we were actually talking about this with SaucyJay, but um, the 12s not depleting affects a very, very, very small percentage of the whole player base because
Mhm.
you are at some point going to be progressing 12s, but before that, you're not once you get
Mhm.
there. And then that's a level that you kind of get past relatively quickly, right? If you manage to
Mhm.
get there. So
Mhm.
this affects very few people for a very small period of time, and then there's nothing for everybody else. So
Mhm.
maybe if keys had like lives or something is kind of what you're alluding to,
Yeah.
because I don't think if
Well,
keys ever don't deplete, I don't think that's gonna be good.
right.
Because we played on tournament realms, I guess, and that feeling of just farming everything like a raid in Mythic Plus is it's
Yeah.
not good. But maybe you have like one or two lives or something like that, then that could make a lot of difference.
Yeah, they could even maybe turn it into a currency. It's something that you earn throughout
Yeah,
the week. You get one mulligan. I would love to see that. Um, but yeah, they proposed a solution for those under 12. But I want I want to do over too.
yeah, exactly. And I think we have this exact same take. What if you just decide, okay, I have this tokens or whatever, and I decide, okay, I'm gonna insert it in my keys, so whatever happens, it's not gonna deplete, and those will be limited, of course. So yeah, that's something to think about.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it would have to be a very limited resource, but yeah, something I would love to see.
all right, so back to what you said. You said I don't know what the solution is going to be. They overtune things, and it's way too hard right now. Do you think if they make it much easier, do you think that's going to be better and it's going to make people enjoy it more, play more, retention, all of those things?
I think, potentially if they made it 5 to 10% easier, I think a lot of people would like that. I think it would still retain its difficulty, but we're seeing a lot of this struggle because of that key squish. So, you go from an 11 to 12, you have this whole mechanic change, and then a 12 to 13 is just a much bigger jump than it used to be. So I think, they've already done it once. I think, what was it, the second week of the expansion? If they lessened the damage of things maybe a little bit, or if they implemented, a do-over key per week, or if specs were more balanced, I think all of those things would be a good direction for the world of.
Yeah, in my mind, if they make it much easier, even more than 10%, what you alluded to, I don't think that's going to be bad because this is going to make people enjoy it more in the level that they're playing, which obviously is not
Mhm.
world first keys. And then the difficulty is naturally going to come when the key level starts to scale and you start pushing higher, right? So you're always going to get to a point where you get one shotted, but maybe if that point is much later in the progression path, that's going to make it more enjoyable for people that are playing in the lower levels, and this is the majority of the player base.
Well, I do kind of like the pressing nature of keys and how accurate they demand you to be. I think something that would really help the community is if there were more educators. When I surf YouTube, I really don't see many people teaching anything. There are some people, but let's say you're playing below 12s, at least personally, I don't think they're that hard. There are problems that you can overcome with just some practice and kind of knowing what to do. So I think that'd be a solution that would really help the player base too, is if more people taught.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this then. You said that you're a coach. First, what kind of inspired you to go into coaching and to start being like a content creator that creates guides and helps people to play the game?
Well, let's see. So I've kind of always been a teacher. I've had several different passions in my life, and they start out with me mastering the trade, and then it kind of just naturally segues into teaching. So I think my journey as a WoW teacher, I just started a YouTube. It was back in Shadowlands, and I just, from my perspective, taught how to play Boon of the Ascended the best I could. And I did that for, I think, a couple of years. And then I had some people asking me to review their gameplays, some of my subscribers. And I think that's just kind of how it started. I started watching other people play and coaching them. And then I think along the way, I kind of leaned into my channel more. And then also along the way is when I found the website Medify. And it's been a really great service to connect me with people. And it's been a really, I think, great way for me to grow as well, is when you have to put yourself back in the shoes of a total beginner. I think it's something that even helped me grow. So it's been fun.
All right, and what does it take to be a coach? Like, how much effort is it, and do you enjoy it more than being a player?
I would say I enjoy it equally, but for different reasons. And I'm not sure I know what it takes to be a coach. I definitely think it's a skill set of its own. Just because you're good at WoW doesn't mean you're a good educator. But one thing that I think is very important for any coach is always coaching to the level of your student. So, for example, I get discipline players who just made a disc priest, they know nothing about it. And then I get students who are playing above 12s. And those are going to be very different students. And I think realizing, where they are in their journey and being able to coach them in a way that makes sense to them and without being like, too overloading. I think that's a really good skill set to develop.
Yeah, and I think that's hard to do because that kind of goes back to some of the things that I do. I kind of like value myself to be able to break down things when I'm trying to create a guide for people that are
Mm,
playing in what I call like a regular level. Because I
yeah.
have many occasions where somebody comes and says, "Oh, this is the world first player," and they said, "This is the build that you should be using, and this is the way that you should be pressing your buttons." And it's not a bad advice. Like what they say obviously makes sense because those are the best players in the world, but that doesn't always apply to lower levels
Yeah.
because we play a different game than what they do. It's a completely different game if you play lower keys and you're pugging compared to world first keys with an
Yeah.
organized group.
I
Um,
think it's pretty hard too if you're a master of something to forget the things that are second nature to you and like to dial it back and teach someone all of these things that you know yeah are just second nature to you. I think that's a skill set as well.
Yeah, and how do you manage to achieve that? So if I'm a new player, how can you translate all of your knowledge, which obviously is way higher than probably I'll ever get to, down to a level where I can understand it? Because in the beginning, I would assume that you're basically speaking different languages with the people who are just starting and you who are pushing for a title in Mythic Plus.
Well, I think honestly it was a little bit of trial and error. I think my first student that I had that was brand new to discipline, it was a real eye opener for me because sorry to that student. I don't know if it was that great of a lesson. It kind of took me having a bad lesson with someone to realize, I wasn't teaching them as if they were a beginner. I was teaching them as if they were intermediate. And I don't think that's going to, promote a second lesson, for example. And I also don't think they're going to walk away like feeling empowered with more knowledge than they had before. They're just going to feel overloaded. So yeah, approaching a brand new student, I think just a little trial and error. And I think always being critical of yourself and maybe thinking back on how the lesson went. Um, Pretty easy to modify your approach, but it is a very different student, someone who has no experience.
Yeah, those are some very nice words. And then you said that it would be nice in general if people were coaching more. What would you say to people who are looking to start coaching or maybe become content creators? Any piece of advice or any guidance that you can provide?
Yeah. Um, I encourage anyone who's passionate about their spec to coach. It's something I would love to see across the community if there were at least two or three people per spec that were coaching. Someone could be raid focused, someone could be mythic plus focused, someone could be PvP, or any mix of the sorts. But I wish there were more resources out there on teaching. And I know it's not something everyone can do, but I think just getting started. I think knowing how to video edit is probably a good skill. I think YouTube is a great place to kind of get going. Twitch is a good place to get going. There are websites like Medify, which actually connect you with students. So I think the best way to do it is just start and day by day, just kind of keep making content. And yeah.
You're saying just start, but if you think about it, it takes so many things. So if you're teaching something, obviously you need to be, as you said, kind of like a master. You need to know what you're doing so you can transfer
Mhm.
that knowledge to students. But then you need to know about YouTube, the algorithm. You need to be able to video
Mm.
edit. You need to
Yeah.
be able to, record, cut, edit, etc. So isn't
Yeah.
that a little bit overwhelming for somebody who's looking to do this?
It can be. I felt lucky before I came into WoW content creation. I made my own content, so I was already pretty experienced with video editing, so it was a skill I already had. But it's not an overnight type idea. There are a lot of supplementary skill sets that really help you as a content creator. And video editing these days, you could get a professional program that has a lot of buttons and it can be really confusing. Or there's probably even just online video editors. Like, I don't think it has to be something that's super
Yeah.
complicated and in depth. As you grow as a video editor, that's how you can kind of make your niche and your brand by making more unique videos. But, I do believe as a teacher, the value you bring isn't in your production value. It's your knowledge.
Okay. And then one last question, this direction. How do you get inspiration to keep creating content from one side? And then I would assume as a teacher, as a mentor, you kind of need to find students, right? So it's kind of the same thing. You're looking for either new topics to make a YouTube video, or you're looking for people. I don't want to call them clients, but people who would be willing
Students.
to make you your teacher. How do you cope with periods where there's no inspiration, there's no students?
Well, I think it happens to every artist. They call it just like a creative block. And it can happen. I think the best word of wisdom is just push through it. When it comes to finding my students, my YouTube does that partially. Also, Medify does my advertising as well. So I pretty much use my own content to advertise my coaching. My own content is also coaching itself. But something you can always do as a WoW creator is make little side videos following the current politics. So I have a main cell where I review my Mythic Plus runs, but then I also make little videos. They're kind of standalone videos focusing on rotation or the upcoming patch, things like that. And I think that's something that can keep your channel going even if you're feeling a little bit uninspired.
Okay, and then help people who are actually consuming that content.
Hmm.
All right, so you did say upcoming patch, PTR, etc. So let's talk a little bit about that. We actually did have an interview released just, I think it was today or yesterday, with Ian Hazikostas, one of the main guys in World of Warcraft. And he was talking mainly about Mythic Plus. Now, we're going to have links below if you want to check it out. But there were some interesting topics in the sense that he said, okay, we know that the numbers are lower in the war within. A lot of people quit. Maybe that's because some of them went to do delves now that there was a level squish on the keystones. But then a lot of them were just frustrated with the way that the game works. And we see that this is a problem. Some of the other things they talked in the interview is that Mythic Plus is their top priority. So they are going to be making changes going forward, trying to reduce some of those pain points that we've seen. So the tank boosters are going to be, I guess, reduced. The AoE and the healing checks are going to be easier. And he did say that this is not reflected in the current PTR cycle, but this is something to look forward to in future builds. In general, they're just saying that they're going to make the next season maybe a little bit easier in order to promote more players to play Mythic Plus. So, have you looked into that interview, and what is your take in what he's saying in those lines?
I have skimmed it. I know what you're talking about, and I guess I'm happy they're taking a look at it. The player base right now for Mythic Plus is really not what it used to be. And I am grateful to not be pugging as much anymore. But pugging is a very real part of gameplay. And when you open up the group finder, there's almost no keys. Like you're lucky if there's two. So I'm not sure what the solution is. I'm sure the problem is shared between many different things. And if they can address that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and I guess it's a good thing that they're acknowledging that there are problems like that. Because for me
Mhm.
personally, this season has probably been the worst in terms of staying in the LFG2 and just looking for keys.
Mhm.
It's always hard to find keys at certain level, but this season seems to be even harder. Not only because
Mhm.
there's not that many keys, but it seems like there's much less tanks. So they're addressing this. They're saying that they're not focused on role participation metrics. I thought that's a very interesting quote from him. But
Hmm.
they're just more focused on the broader player behavior and sentiment. So to
Hmm.
me, that sounds like they just want to make Mythic Plus a much better environment in general, and they don't care how many people are involved into it.
Hmm.
That sounds good on paper, doesn't it?
Well, I guess so. I mean, you said the quote was, I'd have to look it up, but they're not worried about distribution of specs.
No, they
Is
actually
that what it said?
they're talking about this in certain parts of the interview. I can't find it directly, but they said that, and that goes back to what you said earlier. But they said Yes, there is meta, and if you actually look into how people are performing when they play meta specs compared to off meta specs, the
Mhm.
discrepancy is not that big, right? The off
Mm.
meta specs can actually perform almost as good as the best specs, but the meta is affecting people. It's affecting choices. They said that you can always or often get declined from a group because you're not meta, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
although the numbers from their perspective are fine, the behavior, exactly the behavior of the players and the fact that you can get declined from a group because you're not playing enhancement shaman is something that affects a lot the community and brings
Yeah.
more for that frustration that we mentioned and so forth.
Well,
Um, yeah,
I've definitely always thought, I'd have to look at the numbers too, but I think every spec is represented in the top point 1. So I think, they the community base misconstrues this, and I partially blame the content creators, but they think unless you're meta, you're not viable. So I think that might be going along with what the article is talking about, that, even if you're off meta, it's still possible. And that's one of the reasons why I wish people would just play what they enjoy. I think you'll have a better experience doing that. And if there are content creators that teach, that's also something that's going to empower you to feel good at what you're doing rather than just personally. I don't like focusing on what's meta and what's not meta too much. I am, I guess, lucky at the moment that discipline is meta, but, yeah, a position that I hold is even if you're not meta, it's still possible. So yeah.
yeah, I like what you said. I haven't looked into numbers like that, but I would assume that in that 0.1%, there's 39 specs, right? I would actually expect
Mhm.
to see all 39 there.
I
If
think I
you,
think there are.
yeah,
Yeah, you can definitely see where the meta is based on the percentages of the pie graph, but I think every spec is represented, so it's possible, all specs are viable. Even though one might outperform the next, it doesn't mean the other one is bad. And I think that's where people kind of get ahead of themselves with this conversation, is they think unless you're meta, you're not viable. And I think that's wrong.
yeah, and that is kind of contributed to because if you look into that 0.1%, probably
Mhm.
96, 97% of the people in there are actually playing meta specs. So it
Yeah.
looks like nobody, like almost nobody's playing the other specs, but they are there. So that
Yeah.
is a proof that you can do it. But that community perception is everything because those few people that are from the off specs, so to speak, they're probably those hardcore players that never switch and they're like, oh, I'm survival hunter for the rest of my
Mhm.
life, right? But then everybody else is just going with the flow and they're saying, oh, this kid is meta, so I'm going to heal on this, screw everybody else. And then on the next season, they're just going to switch to the next flavor of the month healer.
I could be totally off base here too, but I think most of our content creators are high end players, and all the content they produce is about the meta. So I think it kind of creates a cyclical problem where the content creators only talk about meta, and then, like, therefore the player base only knows to talk about meta. And it's like they feed one another, and it kind of, I think, is part of the problem. And that's just a hill I'll die on.
Okay, yeah, I haven't thought about it from this perspective, but I
Yeah.
think I kind of agree. I need this to soak a little bit, but maybe you're correct.
Well, in my content, I've been doing it for almost 3 years. I've never once mentioned it. And I think it's something that exists. It's important to acknowledge it. If you are pushing for, rank one keys, I think it does matter. But I think even all the way up to the 15 range, 15, 16, I mean, that's where our title cutoff is at the moment, 15 and 16s. I was looking at a graph the other day. Every spec is in the top point one. So I do think it's possible. And, I think a better focus for content creators is focusing on, hate to say it again, educating, teach people, because it is possible. The meta is only as important as you make it.
Yeah, and I'll add something to this because I just managed to relate myself to what you're saying. Back in the day, I started my YouTube channel by just uploading my runs as a restoration shaman because this is something that
Mhm,
I've played basically. It has always been my main, although I have many ults. And
mhm.
obviously, I would upload the runs. Nobody would watch them. I'm nobody. I'm not running 17s. I would just run everything to like 12s, whatever the numbers were back then. But
Mhm.
my channel actually started to pop off in a season where Restoration Shaman was not in a good spec. The good place. Sorry, I don't remember what season or what expansion it was, but people just started watching the videos and commenting below that and saying, "Hey, you're still playing this? Like nobody plays
Mhm.
this. Why are you playing this?" So
Yeah.
basically, this is how my journey started. And instead of being a meta slave, you can actually try something else. You might like it, and who knows, maybe you can start a YouTube channel, become a content creator, something like that. Saying that you can only benefit from it.
Yeah. I think as people, you're going to be called to one spec over the rest, and just and like the vibe of it, the role play of it. And I wish people would just feel more empowered and feel safe to play what they like rather than chasing the meta. And if you're looking to get into content creation, I don't think it matters if your spec is meta or not. If you're passionate about it, and if you know every bit about it, all the ins and outs of the talent synergy, the spells, that is something that I think will sell in a video. And I think that's really all you need to kind of catch someone's attention.
Yeah, and in this scenario, it's probably better if it's not meta, because then you'll be the only one who's making this video. All the other content creators are talking about whatever are those five specs that play in the high skis.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Mhm.
So there are some Mythic Plus changes for season 2. Some of the dungeons are getting their tank busters reduced. I think I already said that. We're not gonna delve into that too much, but one other thing that I would like to talk about is going back to the Discipline Priest. They
Mhm.
announced some of the changes. I actually played on the PTR already a little bit with them. And
Yeah.
I would like to see what is your take on everything that they said. So,
Well,
yep, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, question for you. I've not done PTR yet. Were you playing Divine Aegis, or was that not in your build?
Divine Aegis was the thing that gets a shield if you crit. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I was playing it, but
Okay.
I played it in season 1 so far on live,
Okay.
and
I
on live it would do a lot of healing for me. Didn't feel it did that much on the PTR. Um,
Well, yeah, I'm curious to try it. I've not yet done it, but I think a lot of these changes, it's going to be hard to predict until we get there. But I made some wild predictions on my YouTube where we might be playing Aegis again. It was buffed pretty substantially, but the craziest thing for Discipline is we're losing Rapture.
yeah.
I don't know what we're going to do about that.
So that's my first question. So if you go to the notes where they announced all the changes, etc.,
Mhm.
they start with the following sentence. It's kind of like a developer note. The goal of these changes is to reduce the number of cooldowns Discipline has access to and bake some of that power into the other abilities.
Mhm.
So they are removing Rapture, but I don't know if you've looked into the talent trees and how things are shuffled around.
I
Now
have.
you actually get access to evangelism and you
Yep.
get access to ultimate penitence, whatever the skill
Mhm.
is called, in a
Mhm.
much easier way, right? So
Mhm.
you're technically losing rapture, but and this is what I actually did on the PTR. You're losing that one button, but you're gaining two more, which you can now
Yeah.
use. So
Well,
that
those
kind of
were
didn't make sense to me because they're saying we want to reduce the number of cooldowns, etc. But once you actually go there and play it, it seems like they increased it.
well, so those talents were in my predictions. I really should get on PTR and see if I could get a better opinion. But when I was thinking about it, I think evangelism and rapture kind of go along with their mission statement there. So when you look at the talent tree, rapture is taken out and evangelism is put in its place, the same exact position.
Yep.
And at least when I was thinking about it, I do think bringing absorbs to a group is one of the best utilities a healer can bring. So losing rapture, I don't really like the idea, but I think evangelism is going to be similar. So instead of maybe giving 5 globals, 5 shields to the party, evangelism, 5 shields like proactively, evangelism is a post damage event. And I think it'd be quite the same as long as you have the entire team atoned. You hit 1 global that heals all 5 rather than 5 globals to heal 5.
Yeah.
So it's a different approach, but I think it's going to kind of fit the same bill.
Yeah, I would say I was never a fan of a Rapture. Mind you, I'm not a main disc
Really?
player, right?
Okay.
Because I found it a little bit hard to play with. Just align everything, throw out the shields, and from that perspective, evangelism is much easier. Just press the button, you heal everybody, you extend the atonements. You always press it, let's say,
Mhm.
after radiance, so it's not that hard to figure out how to use it. So I kind of enjoy that. But then again, you get an extra button. I've never played with Ultimate Penitence before that. It
Me
was the
neither.
first time in the PTR that I ever pressed that button.
Mhm.
I don't know how I feel about this. It kind of feels like it's more of a PvP talent because, like, you immune to everything, as long as you don't land in something that kills you right away.
Yeah.
Also for me, I don't know if I was not using it correctly. It didn't seem to be making that much of a difference. Like I would expect to, when I press this button, I save everyone. It did move health bars, but it was not as powerful as I thought it's going to be. And then the other thing that I hate about this, 4 minutes cooldown, man. I hate long
Yeah.
cooldowns, and this is not even 3, it's 4 minutes.
Well, I think they must have put a lot of money behind that spell when they were developing it, and now they're kind of forcing us to do it. It came out how long ago was it? It was in Dragonflight, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, they even did an interview with the guy who made that spell, but no one was playing it. So I think they're now like, we gotta get some return on that and make people play it again. But to your point on evangelism, I think there's a niche way to play this. You also we talked about spot healing ahead of time. So the evangelism splits heals amongst those atoned. I think there's an angle where sometimes if you just have the tank atoned and hit evangelism, it's going to be a much bigger heal because it's not divided. So I think the way we approach healing is just going to be very different. I think evangelism and rapture swapping places is going to feel somewhat the same, but then I think, yeah, without the rapture, we have to have something else, which is where the penitence comes in. But then I also think there's going to be an angle to play divine aegis. So our penance now heals the whole party if you penance a friendly person, and then also penance triggers Aegis. So I think there's an angle where if there's a big group wide damage event approaching, we can, at our discretion, have shields instead of damage. And I think there might still be a way for us to have shields in Mythic Plus, maybe even using Luminous Barrier. Controversial take, but I think it'll feel good. It looks like it'll be a fun season.
All right. I'll just add this, and this is my wild take, but as I said, I'm not a fan of the 4 minute cooldown. I can actually see a world where
Mhm.
I don't even pick that talent, the ultimate
Yeah.
penitence, and then I can pick Aegis or whatever it is, just so that I don't have this button. Not a fan.
Well,
Um,
I'd have to pull it up, but I think the way the talent tree was set, you kinda had to. I think it
Yeah,
was
yeah, because
I'd have to
you
pull
don't
it up
have enough
again.
points in that upper part of the tree, so you kind of have to
Yeah,
distribute
something
them
like that.
there.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure, like some guys like you who play a lot of this, you can figure out a way to navigate your way to the tree and get to whatever you need to,
Yeah.
if you want to drop this, of course, which doesn't have to be the case. Let's talk about some of the other changes. So.
Mhm,
They're big in the sense that now Smite doesn't reduce your Mindbender cooldown anymore.
mhm,
Instead, you get your penance and your mind blast to reduce it with a slightly bigger margin than before,
mhm,
compared to basically compensate for the smite.
mhm.
So that kind of feels weird. And then smite, on the other hand, is just getting this. I think it was legendary or something. It's just extending. It was a tier set. Sorry. It's just extending the duration of a random atonement that you have by 3 seconds.
I
Um,
think it was I think it was a talent actually, wasn't it? It was a
I
talent that
I
does that?
think it was a tier set
Okay.
bonus in season 3 or 4 of Dragonflight.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, and then now they made it a
and
talent,
now
I
it's a
think is what it
talent.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like it changes a little bit the way you think about how you play because obviously you want to cast your penance and your mind blast after you do the mind better now on cooldowns to make sure you get this
Mhm,
reduction.
mhm,
I think it's a little bit less compared to Smite. Like if you had a lot of haste and you spammed Smites, you would basically have almost no cooldown on the Mindbender. Now
mhm.
it doesn't feel that powerful, but it's still relatively low cooldown. But it just feels different. Do you like those changes, at least on paper?
I think it'll be fine. I think it's what they're doing is taking our pet and making it more of a fixed duration type cooldown. Personally, I think it's a love hate. You know, um, we have the opportunity now where we can just spam smite and we'll get our pet back,
Yeah.
which is a luxury, but it's also kind of a burden. So, I have to hope that the dungeons are going to be designed to fit this as well. We're also getting other spells like the penitence and evangelism. So I have to assume that it's going to fit somehow into a dungeon. But I don't mind it being a little bit more of a fixed duration cooldown, and it just happens a little bit more passively with our other spells. I think it's going to be a good change.
Okay, and then I have to bring this up, but of course, there's no
Mhm.
mention of adding interrupt to the priest or poison the spell. Although poison the spell might
Yep,
not be that relevant next season, but a
yep.
lot of people were actually asking, why does the priest does not have interrupt? Like it's the only spec. Can you just give us one?
Yeah.
And now they're not saying anything. It's not necessarily going to be the case. It's not never too late to make more changes. But what's your take on that?
I I do a lot as a healer. I do everything I can within my group to kind of carry every bit of responsibility I can to not have to worry about a kick. Um, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I've never had a kick in my book. So I kind of like the position we're in now, where it's not something we worry about. But again, we do have our psychic scream, and in coming from Dragonflight, it was buffed. So it used to be target capped at 5, but now there is no cap. So it is a very reliable interrupt. A 45-second cooldown means we can get one per pull, and that is something I can manage that. I can do one fear per pull, and I think that is totally fine for a disc priest.
All right. That
Yeah.
sounds good. Now, obviously, you're still gonna continue playing this next season. I think that's gonna be a stupid question. You're probably gonna
Yeah.
enjoy it as much as this one. But
Yeah.
do you think, in general, I guess the question that I can ask is, do you think this is going to be in a better place, worse place, or maybe at the same level going into season 2, based on everything we've seen so far with all those changes and tuning, etc.?
I hope one way or another it stays strong. I would love to see, I should know this already. I'm not really even, I'm not the type player where I read ahead too much. I just play the retail. But if we have dungeons that are less poison curse forward and maybe have some with diseases, that would give us some more, credit and a key. So I hope we stay consistent. I'm looking forward to the changes, to be honest. And yeah, if we could just maybe get some diseases back in rotation, that'd be nice.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of dungeons with diseases. I'm not so sure about poisons, so it might be the case that now shamans are irrelevant because there's no
They're out.
poisons to dispel. Yeah, and you actually need. I don't even know which healers can dispel diseases apart from monk and priest, but they might.
Paladins, I think.
I sorry.
I think paladins can do it too.
Maybe I'm not
I think
sure.
they
Like
can.
I need to check this, but it might be the case that now everybody wants a priest because there's no more poisons and it's diseases instead.
Well, I will still be playing Discipline. My YouTube channel's name is Just Discipline for a reason.
Yeah,
I've made all the other specs, and this one is just the most fun to me. And regardless of where it falls in like this perceived meta, it's still going to be something I play. I feel like I just know it too well to kind of abandon it. I think there's a lot of power in maining something for years. So even if you're an off meta, I think as long as you're good enough and playing your spells to the best of your ability, that there's always going to be a place for you in keys. So
okay, yeah, I totally agree with that, and I just hope that more people have this mindset like you, and they don't care that much about the meta and just play what's fun, and everything else is just going to settle in place.
yeah,
Um,
I think it's a battle. We won't win. I think people are always going to care about meta, but to the best I can do, I'm not going to focus on it in my channel. Focus more on teaching and just do what I can to make even small waves in the community. I'm happy with that.
yeah, I mean, even if we manage to like open the minds of a few people, that's
A
a win for
couple,
me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So let me ask you a few closing questions. Are you playing many ults this season recently, or is it just Discipline Priest?
Just discipline. I have my Resto Druid named Resto, and I have my Holy Paladin named Holy. But I've not been playing them. I thought about going Og, who I have named Og, but I've just been too focused on discipline. There's been too much I feel like I needed to learn still. I'm very passionate about UI, and that's something that's taken a lot of my time this season, is getting my UI totally maxed out so I see everything I need to see. So I also I commit more time to WoW than I'd like to admit, to be honest. I personally don't want to have an alt and be playing it even more. And that's just me.
Yeah, that's actually one of my questions. How do you manage real life with playing a game and then not only playing it, but obviously coaching, which is devoting even more time to this game? Because
Yeah.
maybe people don't know, but you're actually a very active person in real life as well. You've been on America Has Talent, and you've been on TV, etc. So how do you manage to find the balance with all of that?
I just approach it like on a day by day mindset. I have all these different responsibilities in my life, and I make sure I tend to them every day. And I think that's the best thing you can do is not neglect responsibilities, not neglect your fitness. I think those of us who sit and play video games a lot, stretching is very important. So I think just day by day, just make sure you don't neglect things that are important to you in your life.
Yeah, that's a good take. Um,
Hmm.
and then you say you play a lot, but you play basically a single spec. You always play
Yeah.
discipline. How do you keep it fresh? Like, how do you maintain that entertainment level? Doesn't it ever get boring to you?
It actually doesn't, but there are some things I do. I do preach this to anyone who's really interested to learn: is record yourself and watch yourself back. And there's so much you can learn from that, like third person removed or whatever you call it. So many things you can do to improve yourself. I think something I always look for is if there's a mistake of any kind, was there something I could have done to make a different outcome? And what can I do to my UI to make sure that doesn't happen again? So I'm constantly picking at my UI, constantly picking at my approach. I'm constantly strategizing with my team. And we do only meet every other day. So on the in betweens, I do what I can to kind of maximize my UI a little bit more. And that is something that, at least personally, is really fun to me, is getting a good UI.
Yeah, and I think this mindset that you have, like, watch yourself, figure out the mistakes, see if you could have done something better. I
Yeah,
think we can do this like as an advice. If you want to be pushing for a title, you kind of need a mindset like that. You need that to
yeah.
get to that level.
I certainly don't think I know everything, but I think one of my best advantages is I approach WoW with always having a beginner's mindset. I never think I know everything, and I'm always looking for ways to improve. And that is something that I think you should be doing daily. Anytime there's a mistake in a key, to kind of go through that list I was talking about, kind of watch yourself back, see if there's something you could have done differently. And I think that's a great place to start kind of improving and learning.
Yeah, that's awesome way to end it. Let me ask you something else though. If you
Sure.
played Holy Paladin during Dragonflight, they had this huge rework at one point. They become
Hmm.
so powerful that everybody switched to Holy Paladin. It was the meta, right? It
Yep.
felt amazing. People came back to the game and they messaged me. I just came back to play Holy Paladin and try it out. And after that happened, there was basically no other healer out there at this point. Blizzard
Hmm.
started nerfing it, and they nerfed it and nerfed it and nerfed it, and they made it so bad that in the end of Dragonflight, nobody was playing Holy Paladin. It was a horrible spec to play with.
Hmm.
I don't think I ever spec my Paladin to Holy in Season 4. I just played Red and Protection. It was that bad. So
Hmm.
basically, what happened there is Holy Paladin was amazing. It felt really good. It was powerful. It was meta, and then they axed it and buried it over under the ground.
They
Aren't
overcorrected.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So aren't you scared that Discipline Priest being kind of like meta right now, being pretty good at the end of Dragonflight? Aren't you scared that it could follow track and eventually Blizzard could completely destroy it just so that it's not meta anymore?
Um, am I scared personally? No. I've done everything I know how to do to maximize my tune, and it's an endeavor I take on every day to try and get a little bit better. So regardless of where the meta is, I know I'm going to be a valuable part of my team. And I think, again, no matter if you're the meta or not, I think as long as you're doing everything you can to maximize each one of your spells, you're going to be a valuable member to your team. So, I mean, from one angle, if the meta does shift, I might be getting less invites, and I think that kind of does suck. But thankfully, I've fallen into a group where I don't really have to worry about that too much.
All right, and then I guess lastly, some advice into finding groups and how did you came along to play with your team?
So I think I just met them through Group Finder, and I think that's probably my best tip is if you have a successful key, in those last couple of minutes before everyone disbands, just maybe friend your tank or ask if the group wants to go again. And you might only have one of the five that want to play again, but that could be the start of your team. I also think just keeping a good attitude and keys will get you reinvited. There's a lot of toxicity in WoW. I'm sure we all know that, but making sure you're not one of those and just really doing your best to carry as much responsibility as you can. That's going to get you invited back. And I think, yeah, the more you can stand out with your numbers, the more you'll get invited. So,
Okay, I like that. Try to stand out and don't be one of them, guys. You know what we're
yep.
talking about.
Mhm.
All right. I'm kind of sorry that SaucyJay was not here because he's playing Disc this
Yeah,
season as a main, so maybe he could have asked better questions than I did. But thank you very much for participating.
totally.
Any shout outs, any last words you want to say?
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks again for having me. I am Just Discipline on YouTube. I try and put out videos once a week where I teach how to play discipline. Also, I will always promote a one-on-one teaching environment like a lesson. So if you're interested to learn discipline, check me out on medify.gg and we can get you going.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to have all the links to find his YouTube channel, his coaching credentials, and so forth. They're going to be in the description below. So if you guys are interested, definitely check it out. And hopefully, we can get you back on potentially when season 2 starts. Maybe we can talk about discipline again and see if it's still meta or not.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yep, same. Thank you very much. And we'll see you
All right.
guys in the next episode. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.